became Rebbe. And the day the Rebbe became Rebbe, he gave a Hasidic discourse. This discourse is what set the tone for his leadership. He saw himself as a continuation of his father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. So he took as his marching orders the last discourse the previous Rebbe had edited, the one that was supposed to be given out for the Shabbos that he ended up passing away. And he took each year, for the next 40 years, he would take a chapter, one of the 20 chapters of that Hasidic discourse, and expound upon it. But the first one that he gives is replete with Ahavas Yisrael, stories of the Hasidic Rebbes about love of one's fellow. And in a way, that defined the Rebbe's leadership, a radical Ahavas Yisrael, beyond the bounds. And although the theme of the Hasidic discourse was about bringing the divine presence back down to earth, meaning to rectify all the sins of the past and bring the ultimate redemption as being the mission of our generation, the mode through which that was going to be accomplished was through love of one's fellow. So without further ado, we will jump
leadership.
in.
The Rebbe modeled love of a fellow Jew, and it was infectious. The Rebbe focused on it during his inauguration. In fact, it was his very mission statement.
Ist dort damals der Wort, was der Rebbe hat übergesagt in dem Namen von dem alten Rebben, als wahrhafte Lereyacho Komecho is a Kehle, auf wahrhafte es Hawaii Lekecho, I bemeil ist basei derselber Seder. Aber Schaas mir legt dem Dogisch auf wahrhafte Lereyacho Komecho, I das basei nicht kein Stiris, aber wahrhafte es Hawaii Lekecho, nur verkehrt, dass noch a Kehle durch den Ruf hat mit einem tieferen Verbund mit wahrhafte es Hawaii Lekecho. I da in Amerika ist auch allemal a Seder, a deste Sache will hören a Statement. Und das Statement, da darf gesagt, etwas mit a Chidush dover, mit a Inni, was im Mavel es erreihen. I bemeile das, ich weiß nicht, das darf Mavel sein es erreihen, aber ich will hören a Statement, hat der Rebbe gesagt, dass da 3 Sachen. Als da Avas ist Hashem, und so da Avas Ater, und so da Avas Yisrael. Und unter die alle 3 Sachen sein in Kule Chad. Das ist, man kann nicht voneinander teilen. Zwischen einer haben wir der Zweite. Und man handelt, wie bald das ist Kule Chad, und das ist auch ein Kule Chad, wie ein Netz im Seins. Das ist, aber ist dämmelt, ist dort der Klall, als ein Ingen Atzmi. Wenn man halt so schon und ein Teil davon ist, hat dämmelt, hat der Tefis Kule, also bringt ab Chassidus B'Shem Baal Shem Tov bringt es ab B'Shem Rishonim. Also etzem kishat Tefis b'Miktsose hat Tefis b'Kule. I wie bald als hat die alle 3 Sachen seinen Kule Chad, ist in was für Achilek mit Ton chappen, darf man wissen sein, am Chapton alle 3 Sachen. Bemeile darfen alle wissen, aber schaß man chapt so schon Onavas Hashem, I das nicht eine Sache, was man kann damit jetzt sein, und man kann sich damit halten, eben mit Tom Mavas Atere und eben mit Tom Mavas Yisroel.
If you're going to unlock your potential and be your very best, you're going to have somebody see you like that and inspire you and encourage you to do that. The Rebbe to me is like the ultimate coach. It's the closest thing we have in this life for having somebody seeing you from God's perspective.
From that small room in Brooklyn, the Rebbe's vision was manifest over the years that followed, in the millions of people that he taught and touched. It is, perhaps, the greatest mark he left on each and every one of us.
So one of the challenges of truly dedicated religious person is, if you're God-centered, where do you see the other? How do you see the other? And the Rebbe, in his first mission statement, borrowing an American concept, you have to make a statement. Maybe it has to be shocking at times in order to grab people's attention. But we said maybe it's not so shocking, but I want to make a statement because we're following the custom of the place. When in Rome, so to speak, when in Brooklyn, when in America. And the Rebbe said you have these three loves, each one intertwined with the other. Well, unclear which one is higher, love of God, love of Torah, or love of the Jewish people. The Rebbe says that ultimately, love of the Jewish people, love of one another, is of a higher or a first stage that will lead to all the others. If we truly love our fellow, that will allow us to love Hashem and love the Torah. In that first discourse, he describes how the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, on Yom Kippur was leading services. And in the middle, right before Kol Nidre, he takes off his tallis and he leaves the room and he walks to the edge of town where there's a woman there who had given birth to a child who was not well. And he chops the wood on a holy day and builds a fire and gives her soup. He doesn't send, doesn't delegate. He himself goes out there and expresses this caring. Now, the ultimate is the recognition that the Torah is here for the Jewish people. The Jews are not here just for the Torah, but to fulfill the Torah. The Jews themselves, each individual, has this intrinsic value. And of course, you want to return to them their lost object. You want to give to them their inheritance that was lost. But ultimately, the definition is love of one's fellow. We find this with Moses as well. Moses is the quintessential leader. And we find this with that when we describe what is Moshe's leadership. What is Moshe's leadership? It's defined by his self-sacrifice, by his commitment. To give an example, at Mount Sinai, after having been told by God that I'm going to have to get rid of these people because they have worshipped the golden calf, and I'll write a new covenant. I'll make a new nation rather with you. Not a new covenant. Will continue Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's promise, but with you will be fulfilled. Moses says to God, if that's the case, erase me from your book. I don't want to be the excuse you have to erase my people. Now, Moses had taken the tablets, the Torah, which represents Moshe's very essence. Moshe was all about the Torah. Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, the Torah that Moses commanded us. And he smashes it rather than cause any sort of harm to fall upon the Jewish people. He thinks if I break these tablets, which represent the obligation of the Jewish people to keep all these commandments, then maybe God won't pour out his wrath on them. And then in his further defense, he says, erase me from this book if you will use me as an excuse. If you're going to get rid of the Jews, get rid of me too. So Moshe puts his love of his fellow even higher than what was the core of him, which was Torah. Because he recognizes something even deeper, the oneness of each one of us with the divine, higher even than the revelation of God's will and wisdom, rooted in the essence of how is he chosen? So we find a few different stories that happened with him. Number one, we find the story that, what do we find? We find that there's an Egyptian man who's beating a Jew, and Moshe steps forward and defends the Jew. Then we find another story as he has to flee for his life. This Pharaoh's men are chasing him. He goes to Midian, and there what happens is, let me fix the camera a little bit. And there what happens is he sees that Yisro's daughters are being attacked and harassed, and he steps up to the plate. Finally, later on, there's a little sheep, a little lamb that gets away. And he wanders after it and finds it in the desert. And that's when the burning bush appears, that God appears in the burning bush. Each one of these stories shows his commitment and caring for the other, being at the very core of what Moshe was. First, for his brethren. Next, for these strangers in the land of Midian, and even for that little sheep. And then God says, now I know you're ready to be a leader. So this idea, and the Rebbe goes through all the others of the 7 Chabad Rebbes telling stories, little stories, anecdotes, to illuminate this mystical discussion that he's giving in that first discourse. But each one is a story that represents love of one's fellow beyond the boundaries, beyond what we would consider normative behavior. And this creates a paradigm for us to follow of a commitment of life to another and to others. All right, so we will jump in. I'm going to share now, with God's help, if this allows me to, because somehow I seem to be having some issues here. Share screen. Let's first share screen. And let me try that again. Yeah, share screen. And then we're going to open this.
Every Jew
And make sure it's working here.
Every Jew has a soul that is precious.
Okay, here we go.
The Rebbe did not preach blind love. His eyes were open to see the beauty in every Jew, and helped so many others to see just how precious each one is and how powerful. In public talks, personal encounters, and in his conduct, the Rebbe emphasized this reality. Mr. Louis Goldstein is a businessman from Sydney, Australia. In 1989, along with his wife and son, he had an audience with the Rebbe.
I had never seen Yechidus before, so the whole thing was quite fascinating. And there were about 200 people there the first time we went. And the Rebbe spoke to us first, he gave a sikha, and after that, then it started, you went one by one. There was no order, you could go at any time, line up and just wait your turn, speak to the Rebbe. But we were quite fascinated by the whole thing, so we watched everyone else's Yechidus, and the Australians went last. And I was actually standing in front of the Rebbe, maybe 10 meters away, and just couldn't hear a word, but I was watching the whole thing, and it was just the most amazing thing just to watch Yechidus, to watch the Rebbe in action. And my wife and I were holding our son Zalman, and he was, I think, maybe a year old. So we had Yechidus to the Rebbe. So I asked the Rebbe for a bracha for my brother.
I'd like to ask just one bracha for my brother, who has absolutely no shaykhs to Yiddishkeit at all. His name is Meir Ben Etta. Absolutely no shaykhs at all to Yiddishkeit.
He was born a Jew. That means he's not only shaykhs to Yiddishkeit. He is a Jew, yeah. And that is his essence. Yeah. You must only reveal it by removing the dirt or the shame that is covering it up. And that depends on his relatives, and especially brother or sister or sister-in-law. That means Jewish.
So I got a lesson in Chabad Hasidus 101 from the Rebbe. 101, one-on-one from the Rebbe directly. So, and that, I realized that encapsulated the entire philosophy of Chabad in a nutshell, in one sentence, where when you look at another Yid, the fact that they're born Jewish, that's all that counts. And some people need polishing, some people don't. We all probably need a bit of polishing, and that's what the Rebbe was telling me. And it was a very powerful point.
Auf Aiden sich jedu, wo der Baal wurde gesagt, dem Wort von dem Baal Shem Tov, ki siya atem eretz chefetz, Aiden und jeder Ried befragt, wird geglichen zu eretz chefetz zu Ort. Was eretz wird angerufen eretz chefetz. Was wird angerufen eretz chefetz, der Fall, was innewenig liegen, avon im Tevis und Margolies, sie liegt am Mayim Chayim. Sie liegen kamo eitzet, was sie seine Gonus bemavi ho Adomo. Der Unterschied nur, sie da bei ihnen, was sie gefühlen sich Korev, zu dem Eberflach, bemele darf ein bisschen agrobton. Gefühlt mir gleich dem Even Tevo, gefühlt gleich dem Mayim Chayim. Sie da sehen, was mir darf groben tiefer und noch tiefer, kdei arobzunehmen mit alle Inyonim, hamalimim und mastirim.
Mr. George Rohr is a businessman and philanthropist based in New York City. In 1991, he helped found a beginner's prayer service for the high holidays at his synagogue, KAJ, in Manhattan.
When I moved to New York and got married, I started a beginner's minyan at our shul here in Manhattan. It was basically an introductory service for Jewish adults that may or may not have had the benefit of a Jewish education. And I was leading it with not a great deal of preparation, but nevertheless I did my best to lead it. And it turned out to have been a success. I remember, as I always did every year, going to visit the Rebbe for Lekach between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I thought to myself, this year I'm going to be different. I'm going to give the Rebbe some nachas. I'm going to give him some good news and make him happy and proud and smile and especially make him proud of me.
I'd
like to let the Rebbe know, I hope he has some nachas from the following. This Rosh Hashanah in our shul, I started a minyan for beginners who don't know anything. We had 200 people.
200.
On Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Hashem for Yom Kippur we'll have also. And the Shabbos, we started the first regular Shabbos, we had about 50 people.
Last Shabbos.
People without any background to start learning a little bit about Yiddishkeit. And I'd like the Rebbe's bracha that we should continue.
And I expected a big yasher koach from the Rebbe. I expected the Rebbe to give me a high five and to congratulate me and so forth. Of course, when I said the words, Jews without any Jewish background, the Rebbe's smile disappeared. And he looked at me with his piercing blue eyes, and I knew that I had said something very, very wrong. And I didn't know what.
He'll explain to all these people they have a real background of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yankov. And so the Rivka Rachel Leah. That's it for you, and that's for the people who have no background.
The Rebbe was saying, this is royalty you're talking about. These aren't Jews without any background. This is royalty. And that was the Rebbe. For every Jew, for the Rebbe was royalty.
Dem Mieden, was ruft sich an der Weile, Beshem Acher, is a sichere Sache, a sechet von Eretz Chefetz, a sichere Sache, a Baljidach Mimenu Nidach, a sichere Sache, a verbunden mit Mekel Mayim Chaim, a Vayelikim Chaim, mit darf sich mehr nicht haben Geduld und nicht jallenken Tirche wie Gie, bis zum Messias Nefesh, Kipshuto auf der groben Sache und aufgroben dem Bejer bis waren Zetonim Stürmen dem Mayim Chaim Shebetecha, aber das gewähren der Wede von dem Baal HaYilul.
The Nigun, Hasidic melody, plays a central role in Jewish life. It is the soundtrack of the Hasidic experience. A Farbrengen is interspersed with nigunim, some reaching deep inside, stirring the strings of the soul. Others soaring high, uplifting and energizing. A Farbrengen was and is today a time for meditation and reflection. The first of 13 nigunim taught by the Rebbe, set to the words of King David, speaks of the soul's intrinsic thirst for connection with God, no matter its present state.
Came back koidesh chazi sichali rois uschoch voidecho. Came back koidesh chazi sichali rois uschoch voidecho. Came back koidesh chazi sichali Lilo Isus choch voidecho.
Shalom to Pinchas. So we were an element here that we were talking about. The Rebbe told this young man from Australia who asked for a bracha for his brother, who he said had no connection to Judaism, no connection. And the Rebbe said, of course he has a connection. He's a Jew, not just a connection. It's his very essence. It defines who he is. And the Rebbe said he's going to move the dirt a little bit, or the chol. He used the word chol, which means sand. But chol also means, my own interpretation here, chol also means that which is secular, mundane. The holiness is pulsating beneath the surface. You just got to remove some of the chol, some of the weekday, some of the mundane. And beneath, you will see the holiness is really at the core of the identity. You know, the famous line the Rebbe once said to college students about talking about psychology and Judaism, that if I'm not quoting exactly, you'll forgive me, but the Rebbe said, Jung dug into the psyche and discovered iron. Freud found muck. Chassidus digs and finds precious jewels and diamonds. Here he used both metaphors. Diamonds, three things. Diamonds, precious stones. And then the idea of water deep within the surface, life-giving water. And he also quoted from the pasuk, Eretz Chayfetz, a desirous land from which things can grow. So the idea, though, that one has to dig deep at times to things that are very precious doesn't take away from their existence and from their value. Another element, when it comes to water in particular, water gets cleansed because of it going through the different layers beneath the surface. The paradox is that through the struggle of going through the layers of sand and dirt, and the struggle itself is what allows the purifying water to come through. The water would not have been the same. I know that in Africa today, there was recently, some people have been working on a system that would be easily cost effective to purify water. And one of the approaches was a simple device that just had the layers of soil and minerals that could sift and transform the water. So this idea that within us, there are these deep springs of water. But in addition, it is truly the struggles of life that can end up purifying and refining those. Which leads us to the song that we chose here to use, the song of the Rebbe, Tzama Lecha Nafshi. When Lord Jonathan Sacks, who just recently passed away, was on BBC's Desert Island Discs, he was asked what, if he was stuck on a desert island, what music would he like to have with him? And he says this song, among others, he has to give a few, Desert Island Discs, but this one, Tzama Lecha Nafshi, and on a BBC, they played it, the Rebbe singing it. And as you see, the Hasidim are quiet in between each stanza. The Rebbe sings and they sing along with him. And the meaning of this song, that my soul thirsts for you in a dry and parched land, and we conclude with a prayer, so may we in the holy also yearn for you, is the paradox of someone who is distant can have a greater yearning than someone who is in the holy. So King David says, I'm far away in the Judean desert, in a dry and parched land, exiled because of my persecutors, those who have been chasing me. I wish to be able to feel the same yearning for you when I enter into the temple. In other words, there's something to be a separate message, but there's something to be learned and something to be internalized when we view and see a thirst for somebody, a thirst from somebody, of someone who feels distant. And we have to recognize this is the paradox. On one hand, we're all very, very close, where our innate element is God. That's the essence of who we are, the divine spark. On the other hand, the yearning to connect to our source that we experience, or even when we see it in others, has to be an inspiration for us to double and redouble our efforts to be able to connect and reconnect in a way that's not just the core of our soul, but every part of our life. And in this Sikha, the Rebbe was saying how we have this need when it comes to Avos Yisrael and to help another Jew, to even do it to the point of Mesiras Nefesh, to put aside your own desires, your own will, your own comfort, your own material needs, and possibly even your own spiritual needs for the spiritual need of another. And really, that's what the Rebbe did. You know, the Rebbe was someone who was a learner. He, on his own, and even later when he became Rebbe, every spare minute, he'd be looking in a sefer. The minute before he came down to Farbrengen, he'd still be looking in the sefer. There was no extra time for the Rebbe. People would bring books into the Rebbe. He would go through them very quickly. He had incredible ability to read quickly, and he would then analyze to the author. As a matter of fact, when he was a young man, when he was in Berlin, he needed to get some paperwork, an ordination of sorts from the Berlin Rabbinic University. Rabbinic was called the Rabbinical, remember what it's called, but the Rabbinic Hildesheims place. It was called, some Geschichte, some Gemeinde, something, Reb Pinchas. Maybe you'll remind me. But either way, so the head of the yeshiva, Rabbi Weinberg, he gave the Rebbe, he said, here, read through my publication that I put together about moving bones after they've been buried, which is a very archaic, it's not a typical topic that you learn in yeshiva. So the Rebbe came back the next morning to be tested on it. And the Rebbe had, the man was, he told his student afterwards, it was incredible. The Rebbe knew this stuff and he had insights to give, and he pointed out different elements. And in their response to it, they printed of this Rabbi Weinberg's, they printed the Rebbe as a young man, his responses and his notes that he had sent, that he had given. But my point is, the Rebbe loved Torah every minute of his life, but he gave it all up to be able to be there for others and to help others and to lift others up. And this is how what he taught us as well, that ultimately this is the call of the hour. The call of the hour is to help a Jew be a Jew. And like he tells in the Yechidus to the man from Australia, it's the job of the family to help do a little bit of dusting, because he's talking to him. If it wasn't the family, it'd be a neighbor. The Rebbe would also say it's the job of the neighbor. But the point, though, is that we have this both opportunity and the mission of our time. It's a unique mission. In other words, it's not just an accident that we happen to be in a time and place where we need radical Avas Yisrael to reach out regardless of someone's level of observance and commitment. It's not just an accident. It's rather an expression of the truest nature of our time and of where we are in Jewish history and human history, and that this is the apex. It's not just an idea of that we're in trouble, the walls are burning, we have to save people. No, it's the truest, deepest expression that God is one, the Jewish people are one, the Torah is one, each one linked to the other, and the ultimate expression is through love of one's fellow. Okay, I'm going to share another piece. Let's see if I can do it right this time. Let's see if it works.
By seeing the essence of the Jewish...
Hold on. Try it again.
By seeing the essence of the Jewish soul.
Still not. One more time. Here we go. Now we're good.
The Rebbe showed what we are capable of. He encouraged people to see themselves and others from God's perspective, how even the most minute action is significant and impactful. Rabbi Fishel Jacobs is a rabbi, author, and expert on the laws of family purity. After a successful career in professional karate, he reconnected to his Jewish roots and had an audience with the Rebbe in 1981.
As I walked in, I didn't think, I just did it out of naivety. I took a tape recorder and I put it in my mother's pocketbook. I didn't ask, I just assumed it was okay because I knew it was an important thing. So I actually tape recorded the entire thing.
God Almighty bless every one of you and all the members of the family and all things necessary, spiritually and materially, and especially to have much nachas, much pleasure from every one of the children in all aspects. At
this point, the Rebbe introduced another subject which I really had no idea that was going to come up, and was out of the blue.
We haven't seen sleep. Now studying for sleep or not planning to study for sleep.
That was extremely difficult because my academic side hadn't expanded very much. I'm in Shir Aleph. which means I'm still in the first class. He said, I'd like to give you, it's a custom amongst Jews to give money for charity. Before, on your way back, you give this in Eretz Yisrael to charity. Your parents give this dollar, and then he sent. Then that was the end of the yichus. We got up, and that was the end of it. This is where the hard part comes in. The smicha was really difficult. It was really a nightmare. That took about 2 years. At that point, my confidence had gotten up a little bit, and I said, well, wait a minute, it's possible. You can do it. I wrote into the Rebbe, and by now I'm 27 years old. And I said to the Rebbe, well, the Rebbe told me to do smicha. Would the Rebbe give me his blessings to do the head smicha of the head rabbinate of Israel? And the Rebbe wrote back that same day. I got an answer from Rebbe Gon. The Rebbe says, yes, do that. And from that smicha, thank God, I was able to publish. My first book was Chachmat Tahara, while I was in Kollel. It's a commentary on Shulchan Aruch. I published my most famous book, which is Family Purity. I had 7 printings of that book till now. We had a Chabad house at Tel Aviv University. And so I was a rabbi in the Israeli prison service. I wrote a book about that. But who thought? People were dismissing me as an ex-athlete. No one saw that in me. No one saw that I could learn smicha. But he gave me that belief, and he gave me that power.
Als ein Mensch kann öftern in der ganzen Welt, Chaliv Odom Leimer Bishvili Nivre Hoilo, bis wann es wie die Gemorre sagt in Sanhedrin, wie der Monsche mehrere Mol, Alloma Nivre Hoilodom Yechidi, aber schade der Mensch hat beschaffen, schade der Ewigste hat beschaffen die Menschen, hat ihn beschaffen, nicht wie andere Minen. Als sie gewähren ein paar oder mehrere Suges, der Mensch war schaffen geworden, ein Yechidi, ein 99er oder Marische. Und wir verantworten uns, hat der Ewigste hat dämmelt, gleich in dem Onibs von Bashav gemacht, einen Unterschied. Dem soll wissen sein, jeder Mensch bechol Mokim und bechol Zman, a jeder Mensch ist ein Eila Molle. Punkt, als wie in jende beschade Mächten Reger von beschaffenden Menschen. Sie werden 91er Mensch und hat in sich Kehlel gewähnt. Alle Deres, ad Seif Kol Haderes, als darf sich betrachten, jeder Mensch, Seif Kol Haderes, in Zman HaGolus, wo soll sich nicht gefühlen, als ist ein Eila Molle, wo das ist ein Eindruck von Teras Emes, Bediuk, an nichts nur Stamm, ist eine Welt, ist ein Eila Molle, eine Welt, was ist ungefüllt, mit allen Sachen, was sie darf sein in der Welt, als sie fällt dort gar nicht Chosser. Es werden nicht mit dem gegeben, die Pchiro. Soll das Reis bringen, Mina Keach, und Mina Helen, El HaPeil, Vel HaGilui.
In the early 1970s, Diane Abrams practiced law in New York and taught the nation's first Women and the Law course at NYU. Her husband, Robert Abrams, served as New York State Attorney General.
I wrote a memoir of my grandmother. I think it was published in the early 70s. The reason I came to write this article about her was because I became involved in the early days of the women's movement, the feminist movement and I taught the first Women in the Law course in 1969 at NYU Law School. At the time, there seemed to be a criticism of certain aspects of the Jewish religion in terms of its approach to women. And I remembered my grandmother very clearly, we're very close, as very traditional Jewish woman in terms of her religious observance, but yet she was so highly respected, and she had such a respected place in the family and the community. So I didn't feel that it was a conflict for women to take their particular mitzvot seriously and have their particular role within Judaism, and yet have an equal role in the society. So I was trying to explain what some saw as a contradiction. In our meetings, the Rebbe, I see what sometimes call, he say, well, how is your writing coming along? You're writing more, because he loved the article. He said, this has to be a book. And that day, that was actually a few days after the Crown Heights riots, and my husband and I came to meet with some of the leaders of the community to see what could be done. And I thought I was just going along for him to talk to my husband. And I was very shocked when he said to me, how is that book? How is the writing? How is it coming along?
Double portion of benediction.
Thank you.
Double portion for you also.
We met.
Promised me time they got to write a book of memoirs about you, the gun.
Yes.
What happened to the book?
Well, I'm doing some things in that direction, which I'll inform you as it goes along.
It takes you too long here.
You're right.
You have much more things to do after you finish that.
Okay.
May God Almighty bless you and good news.
I think I must have turned beet red. I don't know if that showed up. It probably didn't show up in the video, but how I felt. So actually, from that day forward, the man had a very strong influence on people. I sat down for the next year. I did nothing but, try and write about my grandmother. I did a lot of research, and it did lead me into many other fascinating, productive avenues. So that was very helpful. It might not be what people usually think of him as, his influence.
Die Licht von Kirchhoffim, von Stern, was Israel sich nimmt schon bei den Kirchhoffim. Und was die Kirchhoffim gefunden sich, in der Merchag Otzu, in einer gar weite Strecke von dem Ort, wo sie gefunden sich der Mensch, was die Sterne. Von deswegen seht die Lichtigkeit von den Sternen, bis auf sehr viel, als kann bemerken, a Schinui, a Änderung, zieht das a Stern, was finkelt und leicht wird lichtiger oder weniger, und andere Änderungen, oder sehr bei jeder Menschen in seiner Arbeit, wenn tut in dem, mit seinem, wie ein Mensch darf tun, es nutzen die Kabdruf der Kirche ist, oder Rebischter hat ihm gegeben, wird ein Licht, was beleicht nicht nur allein und sein Mischpoche und sein Stadt, nur die ganze Welt herum, bis in die Himmel echt, was man kann sich trachten, als ein Mensch sich sehr begrenzt. Ich weiß, es ist sehr wichtig, wird tun seine Tag, wird viel sein tagtäglichen Leben, und tun die bestimmte Meise, was kann tun in einer bestimmten Regel, in einer Samennefen oder in einer zweiten Nefen, wissen wir von der Dogma, aber wir sollen als die, was nicht Katmus, aber wir sollen nicht trachten, dass das eine Kleinigkeit, und sie können auf die Mine nicht, wie wird tun. Der Vater darf sich nicht anstrengen, lernen wir davon. Aber das wird ein Licht, jeder einzelne Meise, auf viele Dibur und auf viele Machschower, was Seif kol Seif wirkt sie echt auf den Dibur und Meise von den Menschen, ist von der höchsten Wichtigkeit für ihn und für die ganze Welt, als ein und einziger Mensch durch ein und einzige Tat Meise seine, oder Dibur oder Machschower, kann wirken auf die ganze Welt, wie der Rambam bringt das Aris Klorer, heit in Absag din Halacha.
Perhaps the most famous of the Rebbe's Nigunim has been adopted in many Jewish circles during the special prayers on the major festivals. The words capture one of the most essential Hasidic teachings, the profound love God has for His people.
So one of the interpretations of the song, we read it slowly, it's Ata v'chartanu, you have chosen us. Now choosing, the definition of choosing are not by two things that are so radically different. You don't have to choose between diamonds and coal. In other words, choosing things that seem and are in many ways very similar. So we say that choosing comes from the essence of the person. When someone says, I want this, as opposed to this, it's somehow the true ultimate expression of choosing is an expression of the essence of the person's will. So we say when God chooses the Jewish people, it is one which is not based on our behavior, not based on what we do and what we're going to be. It is intrinsic choosing. It's not because of the deeds of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or because of the mitzvahs we're going to do. Those are all important things, and there is a relationship that we have with the divine based on both what we will do in the future and what our forefathers did in the past. But there's a deeper bond, which is this essential choosing that takes place. And we say, Mikol Ha'amim, the external part, the Jew embody the physical nature of the Jewish people, the same as all others. And God is choosing and saying, I want you to be my people. He loved us, lifted us above all languages and all tongues, all languages. So the Ger Rebbe would say, we don't really have language to describe the unique gifts that God had given us. But then what do we say? That you've drawn us near. Rekei Rav Tanu. And what have you done? Why have you chosen us? In order that we should be able to do the service of Hashem. Ultimately is that our expression of our Jewishness is by doing Jewish. In other words, we're not Jewish because we do, but because we're Jewish, we should do. In other words, if you're chosen, act it. But if someone's not acting it, it's still the same Jew. There's no difference. Moshe Rabbeinu, Yasala the Ganev, whoever it may be, the person who seems in their own heart and mind distant, or others think distant, at a certain level, we're all the same at the core. But, of course, the expression of who we are and what we are should be in a way of positive growth. So, full circle. If we love another Jew and we care for another Jew, we should introduce them to their lost inheritance. Even if they don't appreciate the $1 million, the $10 million you found for them in their will from Uncle Harry, the Torah, this will, this inheritance that you're going to be, if you don't tell him or her about this inheritance, you're holding back their life. You're holding back all good things from them. So the idea of reaching out to a Jew is an expression of Ahavas Yisrael. It's not that Ahavas Yisrael is an expression of outreach. Oh, outreach works better with a carrot than a stick. Let's use a carrot. Let's be nice. Smile. They like you better than when you beat them up upside the head and tell them what they're doing wrong. It's the other way around. Outreach is an expression of Ahavas Yisrael. If you truly love a fellow, you care for them physically, how much more so spiritually? And if you care for them spiritually, you have to be there for them spiritually to help them retrieve their lost treasure, bring them home to the Father in heaven. So sometimes people have it reversed. They think that it's a outreach methodology, technique that teach you to smile at a young age. It's the other way around. First, you have to have love of one's fellow. Then all the other things fall into play. How could you not then share Torah and mitzvahs or whatever else that is needed? So l'chaim, I'll make a l'chaim here with my two friends and anyone else who may be listening on Facebook. First, I'll make a bracha, because you make the bracha first, then you say l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh b'dvaro. L'chaim Repinchas, l'chaim Lerei. L'chaim that we should be able to express a little bit in our life the unconditional Ahavas Yisrael of the Baal Shem Tov, of the Alter Rebbe, of the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, of Marash, the Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe. The Rebbe quoted all the Rebbeim in the Maimer, and the first Maimer he gave was all about how each one showed Ahavas Yisrael to the point of self-sacrifice, both spiritually and physically. And this was the ultimate expression of the Rebbe's whole life. So if we're going to follow in his footsteps, we have to up our game. A little more love of our fellow, unconditional. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. Pinchas, any thoughts before we call it a night? Pinchas, you're muted.
All right.
Start again, Pinchas.
All right. I apologize for being late. I was having technical difficulties and misremembered it as 7:30. I've got two thoughts. One is I was listening to a shiur. Very briefly, the rabbi was talking about how easy it is to worship religion rather than worshiping God when there's so much to our religion. And Ahavas Yisrael is a way of kind of cutting through that, so that in a way the performance of Ahavas Yisrael is maybe for somebody, let's say at my level, a more direct experience of Hashem than some other mitzvahs, right? The other idea is that
develop that for a little bit, Pinchas. Develop
yeah.
that. The challenge is, why is that if it's alone, it can seem as just being a nice, good, moral person? How does it connect to Torah and the divine?
So one idea is that man is made in the image of God, and the other idea is that as the Rebbe was saying, there are no accidents and there's nothing small that's happening. And you could see when he was talking to Mrs. Abrams, that little shtick that he gave her changed her life, you know, and made her take herself more seriously and to apply herself. So this was, you know, him acting in an extremely loving way. And
but you're saying, but the push a little bit was one that revealed vistas for her.
Yeah. He's saying, you know, it's taking a long time, right?
Too long.
Well, see, so here's the thing: it's easy to make excuses, you know, for whatever it is. We have a half dozen excuses, but it takes love to gently encourage the person, to encourage them. So and to see this as a way of worshiping God and bringing Hashem into the world and making the world a place for Hashem. So that is one idea, and it's connected to the idea that in a way, the farther you are away, the greater your longing for closeness. So when a religious Jew reaches out to a not yet religious Jew, it's an extremely powerful experience because it cuts through the appearance and becomes kind of a soul connection, person to person, rather than kind of a role relationship. It becomes more of a real relationship. So those are my two thoughts.
Thank you. That's why I deal with the first one for a second, a little bit. It's almost though as if it's not just an act of worship, it's an expression of unity with the divine. In other words, love of one's fellow. On one hand, we say it's klal gadol b'Torah, a great principle of the Torah, which implies it's a fundamental ingredient within the rubric of Torah, within the framework of Torah. Ahavas Yisrael takes up a big place. That's Rabbi Akiva. Then you have Hillel, who says, this is the whole Torah. Everything else is commentary. Go learn. That it's something transcendent even, that the Ahavas Yisrael as a mitzvah is part of the Torah. Ahavas Yisrael as an expression of that you and I share a common soul and we are really one with the divine is something which rises above worship. Not worship so much. It's an expression of an intrinsic, innate truth that is about identity. There's no you, me, God, other. It's one. So in other words, worship is a step down from that in a way.
Yeah.
The ultimate expression. Obviously, Yisrael has both components, which is why in Jewish law, you have sometimes situations where we say, okay, this person who is an informer, a collaborator, he's no longer getting the benefits of membership in the Jewish people. On the other hand, there's still, even those people who are being cut out, so to speak, we still have the idea of love of one's fellow at the same time. And the explanation that Rebbe gave once about these dual approaches is that there's two components of Ahavas Yisrael. The way it's part of Torah and the way it's an expression of the innate oneness that we have with each other and with the divine. And that recognition. And the second thing about the reaching out, about the soul connection, I was trying to allude to the idea, the Rebbe didn't speak about it, we just sang the song, how much benefit the religious Jew gets from the encounter with the thirsting, searching Jew. It shocks us out of our complacency. It makes us realize that we have something that's unique, special, and should be treasured, cherished, and made the most of our time on earth, our mission in this world. So this is a dual message. I appreciate you, Pinchas, for encapsulating it all. And really, we say it is a triple message, right? There's three unities: unity of of three loves: love of God, love of Torah, and love of the Jewish people. And going back to this idea that you said, that it was said about some people, it seemed that they were worshiping the code of law rather than worshiping God. You have this idea that in the Ten Commandments, God says, don't make a god out of that which is above. In other words, literally meaning the stars and the constellations. But in another sense, if you're careful not to make a god and end it in and of itself to the commandments, they're expressions of the divine. They're coming full circle. So here we are, love of God, love of Jewish people, love of Torah, it's all one. And the Rebbe's statement was, if you have love of one's fellow, that's the portal and the key and the gateway to achieve the others. If you're missing Ahavas Yisrael, there's a blockage there. It doesn't allow you to go further in your journey. So if you start with that, it's smooth sailing. All right, Reb Pinchas Light Ray, those who can, please don't forget Saturday night, 6:30, our musical Havdalah.
All right, Havdalah. Excellent.
You have a Havdalah candle at home?
I do have a Havdalah candle.
And Besamim?
And Besamim, yeah.
All right, so you're set. I don't have to drop one off. You have grape juice or wine?
I have grape juice, sure.
Beautiful.
Sure.
Good.
6:30, I'll look forward. I'll invite the family.
Beautiful. And we'll have a little singing.
Now, Rabbi, it's your birthday, correct?
Shabbos is my birthday.
Shabbos. All right. Good Shabbos and happy birthday.
Thank you, Reb Pinchas.
And it's the previous Rebbe's yahrzeit, correct?
Correct. And the day the Rebbe became Rebbe. I am now officially closer to 100 than I am to the day I was born. 51.
but still on the right side of 120.
That's right. Good. Baruch Hashem, Pinchas.
All right, Rabbi. Thank you very much. Hello, Larray.
Take care. Have a good night.
Okay, good night.